countries and people have not suffered from natural disasters. As we know, the Asia-Pacific region is particularly vulnerable to natural disasters and to the effects of climate change. We have the dangerous combination of a range of natural hazards such as monsoons, cyclones and earthquakes, and populations that are vulnerable and lack resilience by reason of their high density and inadequate infrastructure, for example. In my country, Australia, at this time of the year, bushfires are always a risk. Sadly, bushfires have destroyed many homes and farms in my home state of South Australia in the first week of this year, 2015. Fortunately, delegates, no lives were lost because largely we have learned much from past bushfires, and those lessons learned have stood us in good stead for dealing with bushfires as they occur. Delegates, the statistics confirm the vulnerability of the Asia-Pacific region to natural disasters. Over the 4 decades until 2012, more than 9,800 natural hazard events were registered worldwide. Of these, more than 4,200 were reported in our region of the Asia-Pacific. During this period, the economic losses in the Asia-Pacific region from natural hazards amounted to US dollars 1.14 trillion. But when we talk about losses caused by natural disasters, of course the greatest tragedy is the loss of human life. But we also suffer ongoing economic and infrastructure losses collectively and individually. And the impact on the psyche of people and their communities can be extreme and recovery extended. The implications of natural disasters for developing nations in particular and for international development aid programs are highly significant. Between 1991 and 2005, more than 90% of natural disaster deaths and 98% of people affected were from developing countries. Delegates, the need for effective cooperation to deal with natural disasters is clear. It is now some 10 years since the World Conference on Disaster Reduction was held in Kobe, Japan. The conference took place in January 2005, just 3 weeks after the devastating Indian Ocean tsunami. At the conference, 168 countries, including Australia, adopted the Hyogo Framework for Action 2005-2013, a blueprint for global disaster reduction efforts. For the first time, the world had a common global agenda for reducing the risk of disaster. The progress review of the 2011-13 Framework for Action in Asia and the Pacific, coordinated by the UNISDR based on country reports, indicated that progress has been mixed. In particular, some of the key issues and trends identified in the executive summary of the report were that there was weak translation of policies and legislation into action, inadequate risk and vulnerability information, increasing but insufficient budget allocations for disaster risk reduction, insufficient implementation capacity, weak progress in addressing gender and women's issues, and inadequate results in achieving social equality. On the other hand, however, a positive trend was that there was wider engagement of multiple stakeholders, including civil society and the private sector. And another positive was that an increased number of countries submitted reports. 36 countries in the Asia-Pacific region submitted reports for the 2011-13 Framework for Action review, compared to 27 for the previous framework cycle. Importantly, there was general consensus that the HFA has contributed to achieve significant advancements in disaster risk reduction. Delegates, there is currently an ongoing process facilitated by the UNISDR to develop a post-2015 global framework for disaster risk reduction, the Sendai framework, as the successor to the HFA. Australia welcomes Japan's initiative to host the 3rd World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction in March of this year, where the framework will be adopted. Australia has submitted a draft resolution on this topic to this forum. Our draft resolution calls upon all stakeholders at regional, national and local levels, and importantly, civil society and the private sector, to implement the new Sendai framework and ensure inclusive, accountable and effective disaster resilience building in our region. Our draft resolution also urges governments of all levels to incorporate measures to reduce disaster risk into local and national policies, programs, laws and budgets to encourage other stakeholders, including the private sector, to invest in disaster resilience. It calls upon governments in the region to support the integration of disaster risk reduction and disaster resilience building into the post-2015 development framework, the Sustainable Development Goals, in order to protect development gains and facilitate sustainable economic growth. Delegates, I know the main elements of Australia's draft motion have been included in a combined draft resolution that is being considered by the drafting committee. I thank all delegates for their work on this very important issue. Thank you, Chair.
Muchas gracias, Australia. Tiene la palabra